Welcome to the Nebraska Crime Commission's webinar on the 2016 Victim Assistance Grant Program. For this webinar, your presenters will be Mary Wills, myself, and Kelly Ravenhorst. The document that you see is for webinar purposes. We are going to also post it with this recorded webinar. The other thing we want to make sure that you know is that for this webinar, you'll want to use your corrected application. It's dated April 7th, 2016. You'll also find that at the website that's listed on this page. Please understand that this webinar will not cover all the details in these instructions or the application, so you're going to want to thoroughly read all your documents. This grant is going to be due on Monday, June 20th, 2016 by 5 p.m. at the Crime Commission. Again, the Crime Commission's website is listed here, and I want you to also note that on the website we have the Nebraska Strategic Plan for Victims and Survivors of Crime 2015 to 2020. Your federal aid administrators are going to be, Kelly is going to take the lead, and Mary will be her backup. So if you have questions, please get a hold of us. And if you need any type of accommodations, please contact either of us. For this grant application, it is for anyone who is coming in as a continuation project or coming in as a new program that's going to compete for funds. This grant program is commonly known as VOCA. VOCA stands for Victims of Crime Act grant program, so from here on out you'll hear us refer to it as VOCA. The grant program is currently in a 3-year funding cycle, which began last year on October 1st, 2015. You're either going to be coming in, filling out a new program application or a continuation program. Just a little bit about the funding. These funds come from 2 different pots of money. We have state funds that total $52,559, but the bulk of the funding is coming from VOCA. And as you can see here, we have over $17 million that we will be working with. New projects. All new projects will be competitive applications. Your project period will start no earlier than October 1st, 2016, with an end date of September 30th, 2017. It's a 12-month project for this first year. Remember, we are in our 2nd year of a 3-year funding cycle. And under new projects, you can see in your 2nd year for continuation funding, what that's going to look like and what those requirements are. For continuation projects, we want you to know that this is, none of this funding is guaranteed. But as a continuation project, we're going to look at certain things. We're going to be looking at your grant management skills, how you manage the program fiscally and programmatically over the last probably 9 months, your achievement of outcomes, your completion of the continuation application. And so in that continuation section, you're going to want to clearly talk about how this funding is vital to the ongoing success of your program. And of course, all of the funds, whether you're a continuation or a new program, will have to be approved by the Crime Commission. Continuation projects, you're going to do one of 2 things. You're either going to be non-competitive or you're going to enter into the competitive pot of money. That's going to be determined based on a 10% threshold. continuation projects who come in at the amount that they requested last year, the process will be fairly simple. You'll be able to request up to an additional 10% without entering into the competitive range. And for those projects, you're going to complete Section A in the competitive grant program application.
In the continuation.
Oh, sorry, in the continuation. Thank you, Kelly. If you find that you need additional money that falls above the 10% threshold, then you're going to go into competition. You will be completing Section B of the continuation application. For those of you who are concerned about the amount of money that you currently have that's perhaps not unspent from your first year of money, there is a question in the application, so it's very important that you take the time to kind of calculate how much that looks like, because we will be handling whether you submit a sub-grant adjustment or whether you carry those funds over into the next year on an individual basis. Dates to remember. There is a technical assistance conference call that will be held on April 12th at 1:30 p.m. June 20th will be, the application is due at 5 p.m. September 15th is when the Crime Commission's Grant Review Committee meeting is held. It is a public meeting. And October 14th is when all those final funding decisions will be made by the Crime Commission. The next section will outline to you kind of what's that small pot of money under the Victim Assistance Fund, the state fund, that is currently going to a victim witness unit, because I think these funds are designed for a victim witness unit. Let's move on to the federal, the Victims of Crime Act. Under VOCA, the funds are intended to provide direct services to individual crime victims at no cost to the victim. You're going to want to see if your project falls into one of the four categories. In order to move forward, you're looking at, are you responding to emotional and physical needs of crime victims? Are you assisting primary and secondary victims to stabilize their lives? Are you looking at assisting victims to understand and to participate in the criminal justice system? Or are you serving crime victims, helping them achieve a measure of safety and security? Under the priority areas, things to note is that as a state, 10% of these funds are going to be going to sexual assault efforts, another 10% towards domestic violence, another 10% towards child abuse, and then an additional 10% towards underserved populations, and we've defined those here. The other thing to note is you do want to look at that Nebraska strategic plan and to look at the recommendations that are outlined within that document. This grant program does consider best practices, and so you will want to be looking at those things that you're doing in your project that demonstrate best practices. You'll want to be identifying them within your document or your application. For the purposes of this grant program, we've adopted the overall outcome of increased victim safety. So you will want to tie everything you do into direct services and how does it increase victim safety. Nebraska is utilizing surveys of consumers, and it outlines who those consumers are. We're talking victims, your employees, your stakeholders, and we're looking at satisfaction with what it is you're providing. Just know at some point copies of these surveys will be required to be submitted to the Crime Commission. So you'll want to either, if you haven't already developed those will be something that you'll want to do. We've identified resources also for you as far as best practice and outcomes. Let's look at eligibility. If you are a nonprofit or a public organization and you're providing direct services to crime victims, it's likely that you qualify. If you are also one of those types of organizations and you're looking at expanding or enhancing the delivery of services to crime victims, you're likely eligible. You do need to be able to demonstrate a record of providing effective services to crime victims. You will be required to meet a match requirement. We'll be talking about that later. You do have to be an somewhat established organization, which has you're able to maintain programmatic and financial records to meet the threshold required by the feds. You have to utilize volunteers, and you have to be able to serve federal crime victims the same as you do any other crime victim. You are required to coordinate with public and private efforts. However, these are activities that are not allowable under VOCA, but you are required to do them. You have to assist victims with accessing crime victims' compensation benefits. And again, I want to emphasize you have to be able to serve these victims at no cost and to be able to maintain confidentiality. Below here is a list of all the types of agencies that qualify. The only recipients that would not be eligible would be federal agencies and inpatient treatment facilities. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to talk about grant requirements.
So grant requirements, there's several things here. We'll really leave that responsibility to you to read that in detail, to make sure that you're familiar with what is required and assure that your agency is capable of assuring that these requirements can be met. So very briefly, what I want to point out mostly is that VOCA does require that you have coordinated efforts within your community and service area to make sure that crime victims are essentially getting the best services that they are entitled to. However, VOCA cannot provide funding for that, so just be aware that it is a requirement, however. The next thing is the PMT, the Performance Measurement Tool. That is a data collection that is required also through VOCA. They kind of utilize that information to see how this funding is being used and what types of victims is being used, so that we can look to see how to best utilize our dollar, and if they want to continue, increasing the money, kind of to help them guide their process. New subgrantees, you will learn much more about that at grant management training. Proof of nonprofit status. If you are a nonprofit, make sure that you're submitting proof of that with your grant application. That could be your 501c3 letter. It could be a letter from your state taxing body or attorney general's office identifying you as a nonprofit, or it could be your certificate of incorporation as a nonprofit. Another thing to keep in mind is that all VOCA funded agencies are required to create and complete surveys with victims and stakeholders and whoever else may be important to assure that the services that are being provided with the VOCA funding are meeting the needs of victims and being utilized as VOCA requires. And those surveys will need to be submitted to us so that we have them on hand and able to provide to the OVC if they would require them. Another thing to keep in mind that is a requirement with VOCA funds is volunteers. VOCA-funded projects must use volunteers, and if you need a waiver on that, you can request that through the Crime Commission. That request must be submitted with your application. And then the next few things talks about civil rights. VOCA, is federal money, and so there is requirements for federal civil rights that you're in compliance with that, and that's having discrimination policies, both for people that you're serving and your staff, a limited English proficiency plan, submitting your EDLP certificate, and all of that they'll go over more detail in grant management training as well. The next, the really major important thing to keep in mind when looking at if you're going to be able to effectively manage this funding is the fiscal requirements for you. And we do have those listed here in detail, and it talks about how you need to have practices and procedures in place with your fiscal management to make sure that you're not commingling of funds, either program by program or project by project. The other thing with funding is it is very important in your application to show us how you are not supplanting funds. And keep in mind that if you are receiving both state and federal dollars for a particular line item, that the state funds must be used first. Equipment, I'll let you read the various pieces of information with equipment, but keep in mind that if you are requesting equipment in this grant period, our expectation is that that equipment will be purchased within the first quarter of the grant period so that your project can get the most benefits out of that equipment that is being requested. Also keep in mind that if you're requesting equipment, you will need to have an inventory system in place so that we can better track that and assure that it's being utilized properly. Payments. Crime Commission does reimbursements for payments, so keep that in mind as well as you're looking to see what kind of funding you want to be requesting. And then the last thing on this section is the applicant disclosure of pending applications. It's very important for us as grant reviewers to be aware of other funding sources that you are seeking funds from, just so it helps us kind of make better decisions and better utilize our funding. Allowable use of funds is the next section. This is another area to be sure to make sure that you're reading in detail and are very familiar with. The number one thing to keep in mind is that the services really need to be looking at restoring the victim's sense of security. And that could be an immediate or emergency assistance, like accompaniment to the hospitals, crisis line, that type of thing, or repairs and replacements of facilities that are being used for those victims. Services and activities that assist victims in crime and understanding recovering trauma. So that would be like short-term therapy, and for us, short-term therapy is 12 months. So this could be groups, individual, family therapy, as long as it is facilitated by a trained and licensed professional. you can request costs that are necessary and essential to providing direct services, such as prorated rent, telephone, transportation. Also making sure that you have services to accommodate victims that may have special or specific needs, such as interpreters, maybe making building modifications to better serve people with disabilities as well. The last thing to think about on allowable costs is restorative justice. That seems to be coming back as a trend recently, and so this is something that is allowable, but just keep in mind that it is about the victim and not about the perpetrator.
This is Mary again, and I'm going to talk a little bit about other allowable costs and services. Under this category, what you want to remember is that your primary focus cannot be these items. These will be like supplementary items that you put into your application or your request. So it is allowable to look at those costs for supervising direct services. Also, there are items that perhaps may enhance your direct services to crime victims. And so those things would be allowable. Oops, I got this one messed up. It talks about prorated operating costs, technology type of items. The thing under here on number 7, it talks about vehicles. I can tell you that purchasing a vehicle is not likely to happen. However, if you're interested in leasing a vehicle to do outreach type activities, you do have to justify it, but we would consider a lease. The thing that for the applicant to consider is, I know that in a lease you have to commit to a certain time frame, and you're going to want to consider whether that commitment is going to be in line with your funding. And once again, remember, these funds are not guaranteed. Well, we can do 12-month awards, and we go from there. It does talk about reasonable salary increases for existing employees, and those are things that we'll look at. Remember, the key term here is reasonable. We will look at if you have salary requests that come in and you have somebody at 12% versus somebody at 4%, well, we're going to question why the difference. Number 10 talks about indirect cost. At this point, they are allowing indirect cost, and for this purpose, we've added a new category in your budget. If you have a federally approved indirect cost rate, you can apply it here. If you don't, and you've never had one, then you can consider a de minimis rate, and you would have to submit the details of how you calculated that. Your other option would be to prorate certain expenses. For example, if you have office space where you have an advocate who uses an office, you might want to prorate the cost of that space to this application versus using indirect cost or a de minimis rate. If you have any questions about what's allowable, please, we're more than willing to help you talk through those things. Here is your list of items that are not allowed. I can tell you that the list is not all inclusive. There may be something that you request that we come back with and say you have to adjust your budget because it's not allowed. One of the items that has applicants that often ask about is, can they provide statewide training or even regional trainings? Under VOCA, you can provide training to your staff, so your VOCA-funded staff, you could have a staff meeting where you would bring someone in to train those VOCA-funded staff. If there are other unfunded staff that attend, that's fine. And you could even invite others, but you could not open it up as a statewide training and have various professionals attend. That's what's not allowed. As always, fundraising is not allowed, lobbying is not allowed, administrative advocacy is not allowed, construction and physical modifications to buildings. You'll have to read through the list. Often applicants are confused about, it talks about community education, crime prevention activities, and education presentations are not allowed. What is allowed is to do public awareness. And public awareness looks more like outreach. If you were going into a school and doing a presentation on domestic violence, and then you talked about the types of domestic violence programming that you're doing, your intent is to reach out to victims and to identify them so that you can then help them be aware of the services available to them. The other note is that VOCA funds for the sole purpose of funding items such as equipment or making repairs will not be considered unless your request is part of a programmatic request. So just coming in to say, we need new cameras and to do forensic exams would not be good enough. You'd have to attach programming to that. Let's talk a little bit about your match requirement. You do have to meet a 20% match requirement of the total project. We give you a couple options for figuring out your calculations, depending on if you're left brain or right brain. But do follow your calculations because it will help you figure out your 20%. We do have a waiver of match requests that you can do, and you'll want to be sure to look at the corrected VOCA instructions, and because it goes into more detail about what you'll want to do if you need to request a match waiver, because you do have to, it has to be justified, because and if you're a continuation program, you are expected to provide the level of match that you provided the previous year. Okay. Just know if you are a new program that you have not yet demonstrated a record of providing services, you're going to need to show that you can, at least 25% of your financial support is coming from non-federal sources. There's a couple ways that you can meet match requirements. You can do a cash match. Just know that federal dollars cannot be used to match federal dollars. But if you have county dollars, if you have state dollars, you could possibly use those as match. You can use in-kind donations as match. When you do that, you do have to inventory them for a dollar value. As far as volunteers, we have increased, to kind of help you meet your match, we have increased the value of volunteers from $9 last year to $15 this year. Letters of support and MOUs. Depending on your project, you may have MOUs, but you are required to submit letters of support. Letters of commitment are no longer needed. We only are looking at 5 letters of support. So if you are serving 17, 18 counties, we're going to ask you to only submit 5 letters, so you might want to be selective about who it is you provide. Your letters of support are going to demonstrate or provide evidence that you are doing that community collaboration, so they become very critical to what you're doing. I suggest that you not do a cookie-cutter approach to your letters. Since we're limiting them to 5, we would really like to see what people or what other entities have to say about what you're doing with victims.
Also keep in mind that letters of support from employees or commissioners of the Crime Commission will not be accepted.
And if you have letters of support that are mailed directly into the Crime Commission and are not submitted with your application, we can't even look at those. So, and they're not returned. So just to know that. Let's talk a little bit about the submission process of the application. Again, it's due by 5 p.m. on Friday, June 20th. You are going to be emailing a complete PDF copy of your application. It's pretty clear. This is another area where I'm going to refer you to the corrected instructions because it outlines exactly how you want to do it. We do have some documents that we want you to submit as separate PDFs in the same email. And then you do have to submit the original. You're going to need to either mail that or deliver it to the Crime Commission. And then we ask that you provide us one copy of that original application, a hard copy. We cannot accept faxes.
Okay, so we'll talk about the application format now. Again, just going to touch on some major points. The first one is that in your application, make sure that you are providing us your federal identification number. We need this number in order to pay you. The other thing is do not put applications in folders, so when you drop off those applications or mail them in, please do not put them in a folder. It's easier for us to manage them that way. And then make sure you're using a 12-point font and you're numbering the pages and adhering to page limits. The page limit, we have a handy-dandy little chart for you, so that will hopefully help you out as well. As far as the budget goes, please make sure that all budget figures are in whole numbers and not cents. So think of it like you are doing your taxes. You do those in whole numbers only, and you round up or round down. And make sure that you are double-checking all of your calculations to assure that they're correct. There is a technical assistance conference call that will be this coming Tuesday, April 12th at 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And the number to call in and the code is listed on here as well. Grant management training. Keep in mind that that is required for new projects and then continuation projects who have not attended grant management training since 2014. You will need to attend also. The other thing is if you have new project personnel, so your project director, your coordinator, your fiscal officer, if they are new and have not attended a grant management training, they will be required to attend as well. Others are welcome to attend. I recommend if you're an agency that has a grant coordinator or somebody in that position that is dealing heavily with the grants, but they're not one of those 4 officials that are identified in the application, I would have them attend grant management training. And the date of the training will be announced in the award letter that you'll receive if you're application is approved. So this next form is for your use only. Do not submit it. It's more of a way for you to have a checklist to make sure that you have everything in order for your submission. Okay, Mary is going to talk about the application a little bit more.
Okay, project summary. Let's just touch base on your project summary. This is where you're going to give us a snapshot of the project in 150 words or less. You're going to highlight the major aspects of the proposed project. Now, whether you're a continuation or a new project, it's going to outline whether you complete a project summary, whether you complete the problem statement. So you just need to identify where you're coming in at and make sure you're completing the right application, and then it will guide you through the process. Again, if you're continuation, you're going to have to figure out, are you coming under the 10% threshold or are you above it? If you're above it, you're doing Section B. Let's see here. Let's talk about your budget summary. And this is going to be true of your entire budget. You're going to want to make sure that your for all of your items, you want to ask yourself, are the costs necessary, are they reasonable, are they allowable, and are they allocable? So anything that you put in your budget, if you can't answer all four of those, then you might want to reconsider, because as we review, that's what we're going to be looking at. Again, we want those budgets in round numbers, or whole numbers, I should say.
Yep.
This is where your authorized official is going to have to sign off on your budget summary. There are some other documents that they're signing off on. I just have a little note to nonprofits. If your board chair is not available for some reason and you have your vice chair sign off, we would really appreciate it if you put a note somewhere in your application as to why the vice chair is signing off. Let's take a look at that budget summary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the paper. Sorry, I need this one. Okay, so the budget summary. You'll notice is that for the continuation programs, it's a little different than last year's. No, it's not. Okay, the budget summary is the same. This is where you want to make sure your authorized official is signing it, and if they're not signing it, you want to give it a narrative as to why they are not.
The only thing that is different on this budget summary is it has a category for indirect cost. So if you use that, you'll be filling out that category.
Now we're talking about the budget worksheet. That's what's different than last year. So the budget worksheet for category A with the personnel, it is broken down between the wages and the fringe benefits. They're two separate kind of tables now that you're going to be filling out, and then you'll put them all together in like a total category A kind of budget. So when you're looking at this, you want to keep in mind that salaries cannot exceed those that are normally paid for comparable positions in the community and or the unit of government. So you really want to think about your standard industry pay rates for those positions. Make sure that you're indicating if it is a full-time or a part-time position and if it's new or existing. Also, indicate the hours that that person's work time is going to be devoted to VOCA. VOCA funding can only support the percentage of personnel time that is allocated to the VOCA project. In the narrative, you must include and describe how the calculation of the cost for each personnel position was determined. So if you have somebody that's making $18 an hour and they are going to be working 500 hours of the year on this VOCA, then their pay rate would be $9,000 that you're requesting for either funding or utilizing match for. Also, make sure that you are attaching job descriptions that are detailed to let us know what that person will be doing, and also indicates what the qualifications are for those positions. Volunteers that are used as in-kind match should also be listed under personnel so that we can see where that match source is coming from. And keep in mind that the rate that we have been allowing for volunteers has increased to $15 an hour. So here's the chart and kind of how it looks a little bit different. You're going to fill out each column for that particular position, and then you're going to go in and do the fringe benefits. With fringe benefits, make sure that you're only requesting the personnel position at the percent that they're being funded for VOCA, and we can only reimburse for the employer's share. Also,
I'm going to take over for Kelly. In talking about fringe benefits, what we're looking at is basic fringe benefits, and so we've outlined what those are. Things that fall outside of basic are going to be tuition and bonuses would be something that would fall outside of basic fringe benefits. We cannot support cafeteria plans, which would be true with any of the federal dollars that you might receive. Vacation and leave time would be included in your normal working hours. And on your fringe benefits, you're going to want to also clearly show those calculations. It will be important to not just list out health insurance and an amount, or your FICA and amount. You're going to want to put the percentages also. The way that the charts have been done, you'll see there are little colors for the total. As we move to the next page, we'll show you how that plays out. Your colors coordinate with where they go into the total personnel budget. So what you're going to do is you'll have your separate personnel, and then you'll have your fringe, and then you can see how the last totals are going to be for each of those. I'm hoping that makes sense. Our next category is consultants and contracts. For each request, you will do a separate sheet and narrative. You'll want to clearly outline the purpose. You'll want to identify who is the consultant or who is the organization that you'll be contracting with. Identify the fee. You have to be able to justify how you came up with what it is you're paying them. Even if you're staying within what's allowable, you'll have to justify it and explain how the hourly rate or the daily rate ties into the product that's going to be produced. You'll want to talk about the relationship. It talks about under number 6, the narrative, describing the selection process to verify that the procedure was fair, equitable, and free of conflicts of interest and any or personal gain by any entity within the organization. And that's exactly what happens if these funds come under audit. They'll be looking at those items under your consultant and contract. So all your documentation that you gather, you're going to want to, you don't need to submit that to us, but you're going to want to keep that for your records for audit purpose. Travel expenses under consultants and contracts is going to be the same as when you move forward under the individual category of travel, and it outlines the fares. Just note that there are no incidentals that are allowed. Category C is travel expenses, and you're going to want to note your destinations. It's pretty specific as to what it is you need to do. We're going to look at in-state travel. We're going to look at local travel first. Then we'll move to in-state travel. And out-of-state travel is something that is usually considered based on the amount of money we have available.
And if you're going to do out-of-state travel, you want to make sure that you're showing us that knowledge that's going to be gained by going to that out-of-state conference or whatever is going to be brought back to your community, your service area, to have a greater benefit to the project overall.
Also, under VOCA, out-of-state travel, you have to justify it by it's a training opportunity that's not offered in-state. Because if it is offered in-state, we won't be able to fund it just to go out-of-state. Then under supplies and operating.
Yep. So supplies and operating expenses, again, they are broken out into 2 different budget sheets that you'll be filling out. So for supplies, items that are costing under $5,000 and are allowable under VOCA and are utilized to directly serve victims of crime. So this could be things like your office supplies, postage, training materials, that type of thing. For your day-to-day office supplies, on the budget worksheet, you can just put a office supplies section there, and then tell us how much. And then in the narrative is where you're going to want to break that down by pen, paper, all those other little fun things. Computers. If you're going to be purchasing computers, again, keep in mind that would be something that we would want to be purchased within the first quarter, so that there is greater benefit received for your program by that. And then also you will need to utilize the procurement process for that as well. Operating expenses, so that'd be things like rent, utilities, the types of things that you would need to operate your program. The cost of an audit, if you are required to do an A133 audit, is allowable under operating expenses, but it must be prorated according to the federal funds that are received by your agency. So the next thing that you'll see is how these budget worksheets are kind of broken down. You'll have the supplies, where you can put those in there, and then operating expenses, we do have those kind of pre-broke down for you because that's what's, the things that are allowed. And then you're going to have the total supplies and operating expenses. So So your yellow numbers that are in the yellow boxes and the blue, you're going to add together and put those in the green boxes. Category F is equipment. The main thing we want you to keep in mind here is that for capitalized expenses, recipients must follow the policy developed by the agency. If you do not have a capitalization policy already in place, you'll be required to follow the state's capitalization policy. Our recommendation to you is that you adopt a policy that is in line with federal policy because it allows equipment items costing under $5,000 to be included in supplies. And equipment procurement and management standards are outlined on page 11 in the grants requirements section of this document. Category F is other costs that should be very rarely used. Most things that you're requesting funding for should fit into one of those other categories. However, if you are going to need to use this, please contact us first to discuss that with us so we can maybe see if it would fit in one of those other categories. Category G is indirect costs.
If you are doing indirect costs, once again, you're either going to be using a federally approved rate, which is fairly safe to be doing, or you're going to calculate out a 10% or less de minimis rate, and there are some requirements under that de minimis. You can never have had a federally approved rate. You do have to outline those expenses that are not direct on direct services. Your other option is to prorate various types of expenses. If you do that, you will not be filling out category G.
Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is more the narrative sections of the application. So the first one is these first three areas are going to be required by the new programs only. The continuation programs, you've already given us information in your application last year. So for new programs, the community description, there's a 3-page limit on that. And this is where we really want you to tell us about your area that you're serving. What does it look like? What the demographics of it? What services are available? Think about 24-hour services that you may have. Do you have a hospital nearby, or do victims have to travel 2 hours to go to a hospital? These are kind of the things that we are wanting to know in this section. The next section is the problem statement. That has a 5-page limit. Make sure that you're tying your problem statement back into your community description. So the things that you're identifying as problems or issues in your service area, we should be able to have some backup of that in the community description as well. The next section that the new applicants will be required to do is the solution. And this has a 4-page limit. And again, it should tie back into your problem and your problem statement and your community description. And the solution, make sure you're telling us how these funds are going to help you meet the needs that you had identified in the problem section. And then the next part, all applicants will have pieces of sustainability goals and performance measures to do. If you look at your application, whether you're continuation or new, it's going to tell you exactly what you need to do. There is a 3-page limit for this for the narrative part of it. So agency budget and funding sources, we really want to know where does your funding come from as an agency. If you're, for example, a victim witness unit that's in with an LPD, or not an LPD, a police department, or a county attorney's office, we don't need the funding for the whole city or the whole county, just that particular program. However, if you're a nonprofit, we do want the funding for the whole agency. Sustainability, we want you to talk about how you can sustain yourself, beyond the 12 months. What have you done in the last 12 months that really show your program's ability to provide these services and to seek out other funding sources and that type of thing. Activities and timetables, both new and continuation programs will be doing that. There's two different types of activities and timetables. The first one is major activities. So this is an overview of the things that you'll plan to do in the next year. And this would be major activities that are not your day-to-day kind of business. The recurring activities are where you would put down the routine or things that occur more often. And there's an example of that there. Outcomes, objectives, and performance measures. You want to make sure that these match the services you're requesting funding for. And keep in mind that the 2016 VOCA grant program, their focus is on increased victim safety. The page for the outcomes, objectives, and performance measures form within the application can be reproduced as needed. For outcomes, these are broad goals, and keep in mind your project priorities when you are thinking about the outcomes that you're going to be reporting on. Objectives are measurable and give us a better picture of how you are keeping track of the things that you're doing and how those are improving and those type of things. An objective must indicate what will be done utilizing the grant funds and what will be the measure or percentage and within what time frame. Measurable objectives increase, decrease, or maintain something. They are not action statements. They are not to provide something or to train or to establish. Performance measures, the data collected during the project to measure each objective to determine if the program is successful. And this is really what is important because that's how we can determine, funding for future years. And this is also, the OVC looks at this type of data as well. And this will help you realize what may need some tweaking, what's working great, and those type of things as you look at, the long term of your project. Baseline statistics. These are statistics that you would use from the most current year to kind of see what your starting point is that you have indicated in your problem statement. There are some examples of outcomes for VOCA projects. This is not an all-inclusive list, but there are some examples that may be of benefit to you. So then the last thing we'll talk about is required forms with your application. There are a couple of forms that must be signed by your authorized official. And again, if your authorized official is not the person signing these, we need justification as to why that is. The first one is the certified assurances. And then the second one is the certifications regarding lobbying, debarment, suspension, and other responsibility matter, as well as your drug-free workplace requirements. Attachments. We kind of talked about this already, but these are the attachments that will be needed to be submitted along with your application. Again, make sure when you are sending these attachments that you are naming them what they are. So if it's your 501c3 or letters of support, name them by what they are.
And this is where you're going to want to, if you've already printed off instructions, please go back into our website and look at the corrected instructions that are dated again April 7th, 2016. And that will end our webinar for today. Thank you for listening.